There are places in the world where the past refuses to stay buried, where the walls carry the weight of the darkness that happened within them. One such place was the old Radcliffe Hotel, a relic from a bygone era. The hotel had stood for over a century, hosting travellers from all over the world. But not many knew that in its dark history there was one room, room 313, that no guest ever checked into, and no one ever left the same. It was said to be haunted, cursed even, but like all good mysteries, it was shrouded in whispers. That was until Sarah, an ambitious journalist, stumbled upon the story while researching forgotten legends for a piece she was writing. Intrigued by the idea of a haunted hotel room, she decided to visit Radcliffe herself. Little did she know, the past wasn't done with room 313, and neither was the darkness within. Sarah arrived at the Radcliffe Hotel just as the sun began to set. The building was as imposing as it was beautiful, with its grand marble columns and faded elegance. The lobby had an old-world charm, with chandeliers that flickered in the dim light and walls lined with antique portraits. But there was something unsettling about the place, something that made Sarah's skin crawl as she walked to the front desk. "Room 313, she asked, her voice steady despite the unease creeping up her spine. The clock, a man with a thin, weary face, paused, his eyes flicking nervously toward the staircase. "That room is not available, miss," he said, his tone curt, almost too dismissive. "Why not?" Sarah pressed, already sensing the story was deeper than she realized. The clerk hesitated, looking around as if ensuring no one else was listening. "Room 313 has a history. A bad history. We don't rent it out." The clerk, but Sarah, driven by curiosity and a desire to uncover the truth, wouldn't back down. "I'll take it. I'm not afraid of a little history." Against the clerk's silent protests, Sarah made her way up to the third floor, the dim lighting casting long shadows across the hallway. When she arrived at room 313, it was as if the entire floor had fallen silent. The door, old and heavy, creaked open, revealing a room that was untouched by time. The furniture was antique, the bed neatly made, but the air was thick with something unexplainable. Something that made Sarah's heart race faster. As she unpacked, she couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't alone. The air seemed to press in on her, and every now and then she'd hear faint whispers, too quiet to make out, coming from the corners of the room. The shadows seemed to shift and stretch as though they were alive. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind her, though she was sure she hadn't touched it. Sarah jumped, her pulse quickening. The temperature in the room had dropped dramatically, and she could see her breath in the air. Something was very wrong. She tried to shake it off, but as the hours passed, the sense of dread only grew stronger. She sat down to write in her journal, but before she could put pen to paper, she noticed the mirror across the room. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a reflection of the room. But then, Sarah saw it. A figure, pale, gaunt, and draped in what looked like a tattered gown, stood behind her in the mirror. She froze. The figure wasn't reflected in the room itself. It was only in the mirror. She whipped around, but there was no one behind her. Her heart pounded in her chest as she turned back to the mirror. The figure was now closer, its hollow eyes locked on hers. A low, raspy voice seemed to whisper from the mirror, "Leave, or join us." Sarah's breath caught in her throat as the figure reached out with skeletal hands, its long, sharp nails scraping against the glass. She stumbled back, knocking over a chair in the process. The door, which had been firmly shut, suddenly burst open, and a cold wind howled through the room. Fear surged through Sarah, and she bolted for the exit. but the door slammed shut just as she reached it. The room seemed to close in on her, and the whispers grew louder until they were a chorus of voices pleading, warning, and screaming. The figure in the mirror smiled, its grin wide and twisted, revealing rows of sharp teeth. The shadows in the room began to shift violently, their forms twisting into grotesque shapes. Sir Richards was trapped. She frantically searched for a way out, but the walls seemed to pulse as though alive. With no other choice, she ran for the window. She didn't care that she was on the 3rd floor. She had to escape. But just as her hand reached the latch, the figure appeared in the mirror again. This time, standing directly behind her. Before she could react, the room went dark. In an instant, the light returned, and everything was back to normal. Except for one thing. Sarah was no longer standing by the window. She was in the mirror. The following morning, the hotel staff found room 313 empty. No sign of Sarah. Her luggage was still there, and the door was locked from the inside. The mirror was intact, but when the cleaning staff wiped away the dust, they saw something strange. In the reflection, a pale figure in a tattered gown stood in front of the bed, her face obscured by shadows. Her eyes, hollow and empty, stared directly into the mirror. It wasn't until a few weeks later that another guest checked into the room. But when he stood before the mirror, he saw a woman standing behind him, her face twisted in terror, mouthing the words, "Leave," or "Join us." The Radcliffe Hotel eventually closed, but no one ever figured out what happened to Sarah. The room was sealed off, and the legend of room 313 grew, becoming just another haunting tale for the brave and foolish to test. Some say Sarah's soul is still trapped in that room, waiting for the next curious guest to wander in and join her in the mirror.